Welcome again to the Man from Story Mountain YouTube channel. I'm Adrian Beckingham, otherwise known as the Man from Story Mountain. I have for you here one for the children. I say this story is for children because unless you're a grown up who can handle really disgusting things, the sort of disgusting that only kids can normally handle, you better close your ears right now. This story is called The King of the Things. Telling it here in a nutshell, obviously a longer version available, or indeed it's one of my children's books. The King of the Things. This story begins in a tiny little village, and this village is surrounded by a tall forest. Now for some reason, the adults in that village always tell the children, never go in the wood. Of course the kids and some of the grown-ups themselves will say, why can't we go in the woods? Woods are cool. We can climb the trees of the forest, explore caves, build dams across the rivers. Why'd you say don't go in the forest? And those adults, warning, they say, because anyone who ever goes in never comes out. Things live in there that can't be explained. Well, no one had ever said what these things looked like, because no one who'd ever entered the forest had ever returned. But there were tales of them, only stories. And then one day, in that little village, 2 little baby boys were born on the very same day. One of them born to the largest house on the top of the hill, the other born to a small cottage on the riverbank in the middle of the village. One of these little baby boys, well, his parents looked at him and they said, oh look, he's got 10 little fingers and 10 little toes, 2 little ears and a cute little nose, he's perfect, said the parents of the boy born in the big house on the hill. The parents to the little boy, who was born in that small cottage by the riverbank in the middle of the village, they looked at her little boy and they said, oh look, he's got 10 little fingers and 10 little toes, 2 little ears and a cute little nose, but what's that he's got there on his shoulder? And there on his shoulder, this little baby boy, he had a tiny little bump, no larger than a mosquito bite, but it wasn't a mosquito bite, it's a little lump just sort of attached there. Parents thought, don't worry, as he gets bigger, that lump will disappear, but they were wrong. As that boy grew bigger, that lump grew bigger too, so large it bent over his spine and twisted over his back, so that by the time he was old enough to go to school, he was a hunchback, and all the other kids called him Hunch as a nickname, just to remind him every day who he was, hunchback of the village. Now Hunch, as you may imagine, he was no good at climbing trees, no good at swimming rivers, no good at running on athletics day. But the one thing Hunch was worst at was dancing. And it happens that every single year their school would hold a school dance, and the teachers would take months slowly teaching the children the waltz and the rumba, the flamenco, every type of dancing. These kids, they had to learn it. Tax was no good at dancing. Hunchy couldn't dance at all. Tax was Hunch's bully. He didn't like dancing. The only thing Tax, Hunch's bully, liked about dancing was that he was good at it, but he was good at everything. He was as good as Hunch was bad. And Tax loved the dance lessons for one reason. He'd pick Hunch out and he'd say, hey everybody, let's watch Hunchy boy try and dance, and Hunch, well, he couldn't. Poor old Hunch had no friends. Oh, except for one. You see, every day after school, Hunch, he'd take himself down to the riverbank, pull up his fishing rod and sit there having some quiet moments fishing. And one day, one of those squirrels that lived up in the trees came and jumped on his shoulder. So he had this one friend. Although he sat there one day, Hunch and Quiz, his squirrel, when suddenly an important looking man came up, Walked right past Hunch, didn't even look at him, couldn't even see him, and nailed a sign to the nearest tree. Did that man go into the forest? No, nobody ever goes into this forest. But there was a sign on the nearest tree, and it said, next full moon in our village there's going to be a dance. There'll be food, dancing, music, merriment. Everybody's welcome. Well, Hunch hated dancing, but he liked the idea of the feast. But he had to wonder whether to go. Would you go if you thought your bully might be there? Some of you saying yes, some of you saying no. Hunch, he had to decide, and he decided he would go. And he went along to that dance, and he was pleased he did, because of the food. When he walked into that barn, he saw a huge table filled with every type of favourite food you could ever imagine. But as soon as he took his seat, Tax came up to him and said, "What are you doing here?" Hunch decided to face his bully, looked straight in his eyes, and he said, "The sign said everyone's invited." "Well, your name's not everyone," said Tax, "and you're not welcome. With that Hunch at our table, you'll put us all off our food." Have you ever had anything repeat in your mind like a song or a saying, and you can't get it out of your brain though you really want to? Well, Hunch had something whirring in his head right then. Why was I born me? Why was I born me? Why was I born me? He ran out of that barn. He hadn't eaten a thing. He couldn't stand there facing all those people. He ran right through the village. He ran right past his parents' house. He ran right past the place where we go fishing with Quiz, his squirrel, every day after school. He ran straight into the trees of the forest. He ran straight into the trees of the forest, deeper and deeper. And though there was a moon shining, a full moon in the sky, the leaves of those tall trees caught all the moonlight way up high above the branches, and here on the forest floor it was nothing but darkness. Finally Hunch stopped, panting and sweating, realised he'd run into the forest where the things live, the things no one knows quite what they look like, except they never let anyone leave. He wondered if the things could smell him, for he's covered in sweat. Maybe to the things, "I smell like food. I'd better get out." He looked this way, he looked that. He was lost and stumbling about in the darkness of that forest, creaking the twigs and making far more noise than he'd ever wanted to, thinking always the things were watching and listening. Hunch finally found himself in a clearing. This clearing was on a hill. The clearing was a great circle of trees. They stood branch to branch, twigs entwined, and moonlight spilling down, flooding the clearing between that tree circle. The circle of moonlight was empty, except for one thing. There was one tree inside of it, a dead one. It had no branches, it had no leaves, it was as white as bone. And Hunch had the unpleasant thought that this tree looked a bit like a dead finger pointing at the moon. He was pleased to escape the shadows, Hunch was. He left the trees and went into the moonlight. He went right up to that one white tree, and as he got closer and walked around the back of it, he saw a large crack, tall enough to climb inside. Now Hunch had been inside trees before with his dad, having a story, bit of an adventure. He wasn't sure about this tree. There might be spiders in there, centipedes or scorpions, 1,000 woodlice gnawing. It suddenly stood there in the moonlight. Hunch felt, he didn't see, he didn't hear, he kind of felt something was moving in the shadows of the darkness of the trees all around him. Hunch thought of the trees, and quick as a wink he slipped inside that tree. There inside that hollowed out white tree, even though he was tired, even though he was alone, even though he was scared, there in the moonlight, in the middle of the forest full of things, he fell asleep. Doesn't know how long he was sleeping for, when all of a sudden he woke up. Rat-tatter, rat-tatter, rat-tatter bang. Rat-tatter, rat-tatter, rat-tatter bang. Hunch woke up, he heard the sound, he wondered what it was. Should I just sneak my head out through the crack in the tree and see what's making all that noise, he wondered, but if I see it, it might see me. Maybe it's not an it, maybe it's a them more than one. If I see them, they might see me. Would you stick your head out from that tree? Just for a little peek. Hunch decided not to. Rat-tatter, rat-tatter, rat-tatter bang. Rat-tatter, rat-tatter, rat-tatter bang. The sound went on, and in the end he couldn't help it. Hunch had to. He stuck his head out like a snail out from its shell, and he saw them, the things, and they saw him. What do the things look like? No one's ever lived to tell this tale. Well, Hunch could see them now, but he can't describe what the things look like because every single one of them is different to every other one. So to describe one thing would only tell you about that one and not much about any of the others. But I can try my best, understanding, of course, that they're all different to one another. Some of them had their fingers where you've got your toeses. Some of them had their toeses where you've got your earses. Some of them had their earses where you've got your chinses. Some of their chinses where you've got your eyeses. Some of them highses where you've got your noses. Some of them had their noses where you've got your bumses. Disgusting. Oh, the one thing they did have in common was their unfortunate bogey green type texture of skin. In fact, that's really the best way of describing a thing. And this bit is really disgusting, so don't listen unless you're kid-proof. Have you ever picked your nose? Imagine pulling out the largest, fattest, widest bogey you've ever seen. It was bloated there in your nostril, and you let it dangle on your finger, flip it around so it stands up like a wobbly tower. Start giving it little legs, little tails, little heads, how many, I don't care. Give it some eyebrows, give it some wings if you want. Give it 4 more tails if you want. Great big long dotted spine. Give it fangs, give it bristles, give it feathers. What does that look like on the end? Happy finger? That's what things look like, all of them different. Well, Hunchy saw them and they saw him, and he pulled himself back inside that tree, hoping they hadn't seen him, but they had. The largest thing of all, the king of the things, called out to Hunch and said, "Come out from that tree, Samesy." What did they call me, thought Hunch? Samesy, that's not me. They don't mean me. They need someone else in another tree. They do, not me. I'm staying here. "Come out from that tree in the middle of the moonlight," the dead tree pointing at the moon, said the voice. "If you don't come now, we'll suck and slither and slide you out." Well, Hunch didn't like the thought of being sucked and slithered by bogey green monsters, and so he tried his best to be polite. He came out with his staff, of course, there to hold him. The king of the things looked right at Hunch, and Hunch looked straight at the king. And the king of the things, he said, "What's your question, Samesy? Every Samesy's got one. If we like your question, we might let you go. If we don't like it, we're certain to eat you." Well, what sort of question would you pose on the razor edge between life and death and being eaten by bogey green monsters if you get the question wrong? You're not given an answer, you're given a question, but it's got to be the right one. What are you going to go for? Well, Hunch sat there in the moonlight, surrounded by these creatures all around the clearing. Not one, not it, them, a lot more than one. All around the clearing they were, all of them terrifying to behold, each and every one different, and his brain was frozen with fear. He couldn't think of any clever questions, not now. About to be eaten, and one tiny little question bubbled up in his brain, and straight out of his mouth, Hunch asked it, "Why did you call me Samesy?" The king of the things, he roared with his laughter, and all the things upon the branches of their trees, they rolled, they barambled, they kaboobled with their laughter, and went bouncing and barumbling all around the ground in the moonlight. And when the laughter stopped, the king of the things, he said, "We like that question, Samesy. Why do we call you Samesy? Because you are one. You've got one head. Where is it? On top of your neck. What's on your head? The one head you've got. An ear either side, two eyes at the front, up near the top, a nose underneath your eyes, a mouth underneath your nose, a chin underneath your mouth, neck underneath your chin, shoulders either side, arms side of them, elbows always in the middle, always bend forward, same way. You got two legs, knees, they bend forward as well, always in the middle, and then you got 2 feet and 10 toes. You're all the same, no imagination. Or do you just really like it, Samesy? You all do it. Well, I don't know if you'd like to be called a Samesy by a bogey green twitchering monster in the moonlight, but Hunch had spent his whole life being picked on and bullied for being different. He liked being called Samesy, he liked it a lot. He liked being called Samesy so much he forgot to be scared. And instead, he bowed over before the king and he said, "Why, thank you, your majesty." The king grinned, 2 enormous mouths where his elbows should have been, bristling with green teeth. And the king of the things, he said, "We really do like you, Samesy, so much. You're the first Samesy we're about to let go, rather than eat you, for many, many moons. Samesy's often come here and they always get eaten, but we're going to let you go. The one thing I want you to do for me, as a king, as a request, as a command, before we let you go, entertain us with a dance." Well, of all the things that Hunch couldn't do, he couldn't swim, he couldn't climb trees with that great big hunch on his back. But the thing he was very worst at was dancing. It's the one thing his bully always picked on him for the most. "I can't dance, your majesty," said Hunch to the king. But now the king wasn't smiling. "I'm a king," said the king. "I'm not asking, it's a command. Dance now. If we don't like the dancing, I've changed my mind, we might just eat you." Rat-tatter, and only now Hunch saw that sound came from the things there in the branches of the trees. They were all drumming, not drumming with drumsticks, but with bones of all the creatures they'd gathered and eaten. Fish bones and squirrel bones, badger bones and bear bones and wolf bones, fox bones. And that one up there in that tree right there, Hunch thought maybe it had human bones it was drumming with, but he couldn't be sure. Rat-tatter, bang, and Hunch tried his best to dance, but he knew dancing was the one thing he was worst at, and he was sure to get eaten. Rat-tatter, stop, said the king, and the drumming stopped, and the king looked straight at Hunch, and Hunch knew for sure now with that rubbish dancing he was going to get eaten after all and not go home. But the king of the things, he grinned and he said, "That dancing was brilliant. We like your dancing so much, Samesy. We will let you go home, but we'd like you to come back and dance again tomorrow. You see, us things are in the moonlight only when the moon is full. That's 2 nights, by the way. One night when it's growing to fullness, and the next night slowly slipping away. 2 nights a month we get. Come and visit us again tomorrow, will you? By then we might be hungry enough to have to eat you. But would you come and dance for us? Well, would you? Would you come back to probably get eaten?" Hunch knew he wouldn't. The king of the things, he must have seen it. He must have sensed it. He must have guessed it. The king of the things, he said to Hunch, "You don't plan to come back? I tell you what, I'll give you a present. Do you like presents, do you? I'll give you a present now and you can come back then tomorrow, can't you?" No, that won't work. If I give you the present now, you might go home and not come back tomorrow. I'll give you the present tomorrow when you come back." No, that won't work either. I'm a king and I want that present now. I don't expect to wait. I tell you what I'll do. I'll give you half the present now and half the present tomorrow. If you'd like a little more of what you're about to get, you come back. Do you want the present now then? Everybody point to their ear holes. Well, where you're pointing right now, King of the Things, he had an ear hole as well, just like you. Except he didn't have an ear outside of it. Just a hole. He reached up with one great leg. On the end of that leg, the King of the Things, he had 5 twitching, bulbous, bloated nostrils. And he put those 5 great nostrils up to the hole on the side of his head, and he shoved his hand right inside, and he crambled and babbled and baboobled about, and pulled out from underneath his brain the largest green bogey you've ever seen. Take it, said the king, handing it to Hunch. Would you pick that parcel of slime out of the king's nostril fingers? Hunch thought it was best to be polite. As soon as his fingers touched it, it started sticking to his skin and bubbling and baubbling down his elbows and making little green pools between his toes. And the King of the Things, he said, open it, open it, open it. How do I open that, said Hunch. Stick your arms right inside. In went one arm right up to the shoulder. The other one, the other one, the other one, said the king. By now Hunch's arms were so deep inside that parcel of bogey from underneath the king's skull, inside his brain, that it was pushing right up against his nose. The king said, open up your arms, same as you do it now. Hunch opened up his arms and a soft green mist sprinkled across his face. When he wiped off his eyes, Hunch couldn't believe what he could see. Gold. Fat gold coins. Skinny gold coins. Large gold coins. Small gold coins. All gold. All mine, said Hunch. All yours, said the king. Come back tomorrow and you'll get more. And by then we might be hungry enough to eat you. Well, Hunch still knew he wasn't coming back. He had enough gold inside this bag of slime to last him and his parents and all his family forever and a day. He wasn't greedy. He'd been poor all his life. He was going to be generous and careful with it all at once, this gold. He wasn't coming back to get eaten tomorrow, just to get more gold. But would you? Would you come back? You see, Hunch not wanting to come back was apparently quite unusual for us Samesies. The king, he sensed it, and he said, Samesies, said the King of the Things, you've surprised me. Samesies always come back for more gold and they always get eaten. Always eaten for gold. Seems to me you're going to share your gold, but also look after it quite carefully. Seems to me you're kind and generous. I thought all Samesies were the same. Greedy, grabbling little creatures with 2 arms and 2 legs, 2 ears, 2 eyes and a nose. But you're different. You seem not to be greedy. Not all Samesies are the same, thought the king. But you're not going to come back tomorrow now, are you? Because you don't want more gold. Well, I want you to come back, said the king. I want you to come back, and I'm king, and I'm in charge of this clearing in this forest. And to make you come back, I'm going to take something that's yours, something you need, and that'll make you come back. Well, the king reached up with that great long arm full of tentacles like hair, thick rope coming out, green slime, 5 twitching nostrils on the end, came up over Hunch, and Hunch, he tried to run with that bag of gold on his stick. He tried to run, but he was no good at running, and the great long arm of the king and those 5 twitching nostrils picked Hunch straight up in the air, swung him this way and swung him that, and then gently put him back down again. And Hunch stood up straight. I said Hunch stood up straight. For the first time in his life, his hunch was gone. And he didn't need his walking stick anymore. There, in the 5 twitching nostrils of the King of the Things, was Hunch's hump. King said, come back tomorrow, and I'll give you back your hunch. Well, do you think you'd come back for that? Hunch left the forest. He was still bent over, Didn't have his hump anymore, but he was stooped over low with the weight of that bag of gold across his back. He went back to the village of the Samesies, pointed in that direction by the things. When finally he got home, well, that's certainly not the end of this story. A lot more happens. You've not even received the beginning. You've certainly not received the end. All you've received is one thick, slimy slice. But you've heard enough of the story to decide. If you found that clearing in the moonlight, with a tree in a circle, branch to branch and twig to twig, and there's one tree in the very centre all alone with no branches and no leaves, pointing at the full moon like a dead finger. If it is a full moon and the things are due to come, you've heard enough of the story to decide, are you brave enough to go up to that tree and climb inside?